Wisdom is a special category in the Old Testament. It's not just observations of an old guy who's giving advice. It was a part of the culture. In Israel's life, you had the prophet, the priest, and the king. Those were the three official offices of the nation Israel. But then you also had this unofficial position of a person called a sage. And this is not unique to Israel. The other nations around, the Egyptians and the Akkadians and the Sumerians and all the other nations around, you had your wise people. In fact, you remember the story when Moses confronts Pharaoh and he says, God has told me to tell you to let your people go. And to convince Pharaoh of that, Moses performs a series of miracles. And Pharaoh says, that's no big deal. Watch this. And he calls his wise men to come and to perform the same kinds, apparently. They were illusions, they weren't miracles, but they performed some kind of trickery, and they were called wise men. So this category of having sages or wise people was very common in the ancient Near East. And the things that they wrote were intended not to give theological insight, although obviously it treads into that in the scripture, but to give daily perspective. So we've got the fact that we're compelled by love and we're convinced by faith. That's the realm of the theologian in the library, like the Apostle Paul, writing the nature and character of God. And wisdom is based upon understanding and having a fear of the Lord. But then we also have being engaged in life, and this is wisdom. When we take the truths that we know to be a revelation and an explanation of the heart, the nature, the character of God, and we bring it into daily life, and we find ourselves in those difficult situations that within the realm of all that is good and true and right and moral, we still have to make difficult decisions. That is wisdom. What do we mean when we're talking about wisdom? What does it mean to be a wise person? A wise person is somebody who has the skill of living righteously. And the word wisdom in the Old Testament, you see these four pictures up here, the four icons. They're on some of the pages as well. The word wisdom in the Old Testament is also used to describe people who were skilled in the trades. So when Moses was given instructions on building the tabernacle, and then David was given instructions and gave instructions to Solomon on building the temple, God said to both Moses and to Solomon, gather people who are wise. And what he meant was gather people who are skilled in creating all the various elements that are going to make up the temple, whether it's the tapestry at the back, or the altar, or the bowl of incense, or whatever it was going to be. But all of that furniture, all the contents that made up the temple were made by craftsmen, and they were carved with images to remind Israel that when they went into, not the Holy of Holies obviously, but into the other parts of the tabernacle or the temple, they would see the craftsmanship. They would see these images, and it would remind them that God is creator of all things, that God is over all things. And when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies once a year on the Day of Atonement and would see the imagery there on that altar and the craftsmanship, this was not put together by a DIY who went to Home Depot and picked up some crooked 2x4s and nailed them together. These are carpenters who are highly skilled. These are artisans in tapestry. These are brick and stone masons who are creating these very beautiful objects of art. And they are specifically called skilled people or wise people. So wisdom for us in the 21st century are those who are artisans, who are skilled in our trade, but our trade is living righteously, taking these truths we know about God and His nature and His character and His what He has done as creator and the fact that all of this is under His authority, and then how do we live that out with skill? And it does take skill, because we can be in a situation that it's not a question of choosing between right and wrong, not even a question of choosing between good, better, and best, but a question of how do I best represent Christ in this scenario. And there may be more than one option, and the option I choose may not be the option that somebody else chooses. So wisdom equips us to deal with righteousness in everyday life. And it's all about relationship. It's about relationship with God, expressing itself in relationships of every day. So there's an awful lot of discussion in wisdom literature about money, about the use of the tongue and of speech, about conflict and conflict resolution, about the relationship between a husband and a wife. I love some of the images in Proverbs, contrasting images that give some wisdom. On one hand, it says, to live with a contentious wife is like listening to the incessant dripping of rain on a roof. I didn't write that, Solomon did. Okay, that's in the Bible. Okay, that's Graham's paraphrase, but that's basically what it says. But it also says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and receives a grace from God. So two totally different perspectives on the same thing, the relationship between a husband and wife. And it's a perspective on how to value, how to contextualize the nature of that relationship. So wisdom is not dealing with the theological abstracts like the Apostle Paul does. It's dealing with taking what we know to be true about God, those things in his created order, what is true, what is real, what has value, and having the skill to live a righteous life in a creation that is now broken and chaotic, and where unrighteousness seems to have the upper hand. And how do we engage with that? How do we properly respond to injustice? How do we properly express anger without sinning? How do we affirm people without affirming their agendas? How do we know where to draw the line for righteous behaviors? And can a Christian wear certain kinds of clothes or participate in events that some others may look at and say you can't or you shouldn't do that? How can professionals in the world, as followers of Jesus, navigate the pressures, the social pressures on them? The mandate of a pastor, I believe, from the New Testament, is to teach and instruct the truths of Christ and his kingdom, to encourage and support the process of living in the kingdom now. That's the transformation and the maturation. But it's also learning how to become faithful stewards of the resources the Creator God has given to us, how to represent Christ well, and how to live with a sensitivity that all of life takes place in his presence. What does it mean for God to be omnipresent? Does it mean that he is everywhere, like he's in the chair, he's in the rocks, he's in the floor, he's in the trees? Some people would say that, but no, that's not the biblical perspective. The biblical perspective is the earth is the Lord's and all it contains, and he is on his throne and ruling over it. So wisdom understands that life is lived in the presence of God, and as a person committed to righteousness, I want to have a skill, so I represent that king in his kingdom. And that's what we're going to do through this process, I hope, as we take a look at Solomon's teaching about wisdom. And we're going to start by these two texts in Proverbs chapter 9 and Proverbs chapter 2. I start first with Proverbs 9 simply because it's a little shorter and a little bit more succinct. But Proverbs 9, verses 9 and 10 say this: "Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning." So a person who has a heart open to learning these skills will, in fact, increase their skill base. This is something that's an ongoing process. You don't just become wise, attain that badge, that accomplishment, and, oh, look I'm wise. It's an ongoing process. But what is this wisdom? Well, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Familiar words, but what do they mean? Let's go to Proverbs chapter 2 and try to unpack that a little bit. My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So it's something to be pursued. It has great value, but it does not come automatically. It is not something that you just because you're old, you're wise. And in fact, Solomon talks about that in Ecclesiastes, that there was a city where a young wise man saved a city from an old foolish king. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth comes knowledge. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright, and he is a shield to those who walk in integrity. So a key part of understanding wisdom is that it is about righteousness and the skill of living righteously in everyday life. So we have to know then what righteousness is. And if we have to know what righteousness is, we need to know who this Lord is and what it means to have fear in him. So let me just give a little bit of quick background about wisdom literature itself. As I said, there are 5 books in the Bible that are considered wisdom literature. Psalms, not in its entirety, but there are several Psalms that are considered wisdom Psalms. Then Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And what makes these wisdom books is they have a unique style of writing and a unique kind of a content. In fact, you could read Ecclesiastes and come to the conclusion, is Solomon even really believing in God? And unless you understand some of the presuppositions and you read the very last part of the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 12, where it says, the end, when all has been heard, the end of the matter is this: fear God and obey his commandments. So you know that in all that rambling throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, he's ultimately getting to something that has to do with righteousness and relationship with God. Secondly, wisdom literature is unique because it uses very concrete images. Who in their right mind would write in the Bible something that says, living with a contentious wife is like listening to the sound of rain dripping on the roof? I mean, you don't see that in the Apostle Paul, you don't see that in the Gospels. And yet in the wisdom literature, because there's this desire to bring it down to the reality of life, we have very graphic, very concrete images that we can all relate to. Thunderstorms and boats that are struggling in a storm and watching an eagle sail in the sky. One of my favorites towards the end of Proverbs chapter 30, it uses a series of numbers. For 3 things, yea, for 4, my mind is confused, it's overwhelmed. And the 3 things are looking at an eagle in the sky, or a serpent on the rock, or a boat in the middle of a storm. What is it that makes these things the way they are? And then it says, the 4th thing that really confuses me is the way of a young man with a maiden. And we've all seen that, right? I was sharing some of this information at Sharon's school on Friday, and they had high school, middle school teachers there. So just imagine middle school students. We've seen them, we've had them if you have kids, or high school students. And you know, he likes her and she likes him, but they're kind of awkward. And how do you have that relationship with one another? And so they act and they do silly things and they try to be brave and they show off a little bit. You know, and as an adult, you kind of stand back and you watch the way young people interact with one another. And I remember the first time I met Sharon and my heart going all twitter-twatter inside me. And it's like, how am I even going to approach this young woman? And doing the background research with my spies who happen to know. I didn't want to blow my first impression. It makes you do crazy things. These are kinds of images that Solomon uses. There are 3 things that amaze me, and yet the 4th is truly strange. The way of a young man with a young girl. Yes, love makes you do crazy things. Third, wisdom assumes that the earth is the Lord's, Psalm 8, and all it contains. There is no dichotomy that this is Satan's, this is secular, no. Even the unrighteous, even Satan, according to the book of Job, is subject to the authority of God. And wisdom says, my confidence is in God and I am not distracted by my circumstances because, as Job said, the Lord gives, the Lord takes, Blessed be the name of the Lord. So this all-encompassing understanding that the earth is the Lord's and all it contains. And finally, fourth, wisdom is a skill that has to be learned and relearned and relearned and continually in the process of being retrained. Just the four images I have up here are a potter, a carpenter, an artist, a painter, and a stonemason. And if you have any one of those trade skills, you're not just satisfied, the potter is not just satisfied to crank out one style of flower pot, but they are constantly innovating and looking for new ways to hone their craft and create new products. A stonemason is not content to build brick walls all day long. Sooner or later, he wants to be able to build the arch. And if you're trying to create that kind of a craft and you want to practice, come to my backyard and build me a pizza oven. I would love that. The artist is not content with doodling stick figures, but wants to understand, why is the Mona Lisa one of the most revered pieces of art in the world? Why is that? What is it that's so special? And the carpenter isn't just going to hammer together nails and 2x4s, but wants to create that piece of furniture that perhaps can be a cradle for a young baby, where a mother will look in wonder and rock that baby to sleep at night. There's that constant enhancement of the skill set. So this idea of the fear of the Lord is absolutely critical. But before we look at what it means to fear the Lord, let's look at very quickly what it is to have the Lord part of it. Who is this Lord? In the ancient Near East, remember, Israel was unique because they were the only nation that were monotheistic, that worshiped one God, the creator of heaven and earth. All the other nations around them worshiped a multitude of gods. And reality on earth was a reflection of what was happening in the heavens. As the gods had their battles in the heavens, so also happened the things on the earth, whether it was storms or political wars between nations, whatever. But the reality on earth was based on the chaos happening in the heavens. And the propagation and the growth of things on earth was a result of propagation in the heavens. And the immorality that took place up there was reflected by the immorality that's taking place down here. And in contrast to that, we have a nation called Israel, to whom God reveals himself and says, I am your God, beginning all the way back with Adam and Eve, and then Abraham and Moses. And I am the one, ultimately, who brings you out of, speaking to Moses, brings you out of Egypt and gives you this land and establishes you in this land, because I am the creator of heaven and earth. He is a personal God. That is, that he is someone, a being to whom we can relate. He is a person, not a human, but he is a person, unlike the other gods that were just these obscure mythical creatures. He is knowable. He has revealed himself. And one of the great challenges of the pantheon of gods of the other nations, like Baal and Ashtoreth and the other nations, is you never knew what they wanted. How do you possibly make the gods happy? Because we don't know. There's no revelation from them. We don't know what they want. So we've got to guess. Maybe if we offer this sacrifice, maybe if we do this ritual, maybe if we complete this kind of sacrifice. And you're always guessing. Israel's God is knowable, relational, and he has revealed himself when Moses went up to Sinai and received the covenant. And then, because he's knowable, he has chosen to reveal his expectations. He does not hide. And although we may feel that he's far away and that we are isolated and that he doesn't know and he doesn't care, he is concerned. He is passionate. The Psalms are filled with that, of his loving care and concern. And then Jesus explained that even further, that even if a sparrow falls from the sky, or a hair falls out of your head, our Father knows that. And he knows what you need even before you approach him in prayer. So this personal God, this knowable God, this revealed God, ultimately revealed through Jesus Christ himself, is the one who is the object of our fear. But what does that mean to fear the Lord? We're going to take a look at several Bible verses now, coming out of wisdom literature, that help us understand what it is to fear the Lord. As we go through that, actually, let me explain something a little bit more before we go through those verses. A word does not get its meaning simply by the way it is spelled or from a dictionary, but how it is used. So the word run, for example, could be used in English in any number of ways. I could run, like a race. I could run a machine as an operator. I could run for political office, up for election. I could get a run in my nylons. Well, not my nylons, but some of you could get a run in your nylons. It could be used in any number of ways, and the way that you use it tells me the meaning. So also, when we talk about fear, the most common thing that pops into our mind is that emotive response. But if we look at a broader usage of the word fear, we're going to see there are at least 5 distinct dimensions or perspectives on using this. 5 nuances, you might say. And let me just run through these very quickly. The first nuance is that emotional. Fear and emotion are very much connected. When I was working on my bees back in the summer, I discovered that there was a little gap in my bee suit. The zipper wasn't closed all the way, and all of a sudden I had 3 bees buzzing around inside. They're supposed to be outside. They were buzzing around inside. I had fear. And I was calling out for Ken, come help me. Now I'm seeing probably like a little girl thinks there's me scream, and they're probably going, let me out of here. And I'm screaming, ah! There was emotional fear there, and I did get stung by them a couple of times, and it wasn't very pleasant because emotion and fear are connected. And in our relationship with God, there does have to be that understanding of His ability, because He is God over all things. There ought to be an emotive respect for who He is. Great power of the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord. Exodus 14:31. There was an emotive response. And when Moses went up onto Mount Sinai and the mountain trembled, the people stepped back in fear because they began to understand this God is not like any other God. So there is an emotive component to fear. But there's much more to that. There's also fear in the sense of reverence and honor. In Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 1-4, if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams rises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and that sign or wonder he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let's go to other gods which you have known, let us serve him, you shall not listen to his words of the prophet or the dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments. The idea of loyalty, of honoring, of having reverence for is included in this concept of fear. And then there's a component of wonder. This is what happens when the scripture reference is on my next page. Daniel chapter 9, when Daniel prays, I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love to those who love him and keep his commandments. We have sinned and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside from your commandments and rules. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, and to all the people of the Lord. To you, O Lord, belongs righteousness, but to us the shame, as this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel, to all who are near, and to those who are far away, to all the lands to which you have driven them, because of the treachery which we have committed against you. At the beginning of that, I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God. That's the same word, fear. The sense of wonder. That how can it be that this God, against whom we have committed all of these sins, still loves us and wants relationship and is willing to forgive? That when we talk about the fear of the Lord, there's a certain amount of wonder. There's also an element of obedience. Jesus, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and the statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding today for your good. What does he want? But to fear him. And how do we express that? By keeping his commandments. And then there's a worship, service, relational component to fear. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Joshua 24:14. That element of worship, if we fear God, we will worship him. So wisdom is life lived in the presence of God, beyond just a database of doctrine and facts, but understanding, because these things are true, because God is the creator of all things, how do I develop and learn the skills of living righteously in his creation? Let's take a look at some of these verses just that help illustrate from the book of Proverbs alone what the fear of the Lord is. Starting here in Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is insight. We've already looked at that. Next one, Gord. The fear of the Lord prolongs life, but years of the wicked will be cut short. These are all very positive messages, benefits of what it means to fear God. Next one. In the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will find a refuge. It sounds great. Next one. The fear of the Lord is that one may turn away from the snares of death. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. The fear of the Lord is instruction and wisdom, and humility comes before honor. By steadfast love and faithfulness, iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord, one turns away from evil. These are wonderful statements, aren't they? The fear of the Lord leads to life, and whoever has it rests satisfied. He will not be visited by harm. The reward for humility and the fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. Wow, isn't that great? We're going to all get rich. Then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil, pride and arrogance in the way of evil, and perverted speech I hate. So it's not just all unicorns and roses. Let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. So there is, while great blessing promised if we pursue a skillful life, and we have to remember the book of Proverbs is not a book of promises to us, but observations about the nature of life if we live righteously. The world is broken, and we can do everything right. We can have all the right inputs into life and still not have the outputs that we desire. Like Job, lived righteously. And yet, despite all of his righteousness, he went through a period of immeasurable suffering. The point is not manipulating God to get what I want. The point is surviving with my integrity intact and my righteousness intact in a broken world, because I understand that God is creator of all things, in life above the sun, as Solomon would say, life of wisdom recognizes that this God is not going to let that injustice escape his attention, even though for now I will be uncomfortable and this is going to be very difficult for me. It's an ultimate expression of faith in a living God. In Deuteronomy, Moses put it this way. This is a familiar passage. I've read it over and over again here at Q50. I love this text. This is the summary, I think, of the focus of our belief, for Israel, and then we can transpose that easily to our day. Deuteronomy chapter 4. For ask now of the days that are past, which were before you since that day that God created man on the earth. So here's God, the creator God, who created man on the earth. And ask from one end of heaven to the other, has such a great thing ever happened or has ever been heard of? And the answer is no. What great thing? Did any people ever hear the voice of a God speaking out of the midst of a fire as you have heard and still live? And the answer is no. Or has any God ever attempted to go and make a nation for himself from the midst of another nation by trials and signs and wonders and war and a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great deeds of terror, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? No. Why? Because God is in relationship with his people. To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. Out of the heaven he let you hear his voice, that he might discipline you. And on the earth he let you see his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers and chose their offspring after them, and brought you out of Egypt with his own presence by his great power, driving out before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land for an inheritance, as is this day. Know therefore today, and lay it to your heart, that the Lord is God in heaven above and earth below. This is the core of wisdom. That the earth is the Lord's and all it contains. And we are learning the skill of living life in the presence of God because he is God and because we fear him. We are overwhelmed with wonder for him. We worship him. We do have that emotive response that he is God, and yet we also enjoy intimacy with him. Lay it to your heart that the Lord is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. There is no other. My favorite phrase, there is no other. And sometimes all we can do when the chaos is roaring around us and we're in the middle of confusion is remember that phrase, there is no other. Because that's what it means to fear God, and that is the beginning of wisdom.